Good afternoon, the wonderful world of Facebook. I hope everyone is doing very well today. So today our live topic is going to be about hydration, okay, and water, not beer. So I'm going to get Chris on the blower, and we're going to have a little chat about water and how important it is to get enough in your system. So Mr. Miller will be with us soon. Here he is.
Tommy.
How are you, buddy?
Good, how are you?
I'm very well. Where are you, mate? You look like you're just about to do a training session.
Yeah, shortly I am. I'll go for a swim and then come back and do some training shortly. Just at my folks' pool in Newmarket in Brisbane, so just on family holidays. So I've got to get out there and play with the kids for a bit before I do some training.
Beautiful, awesome. Okay, so today's topic is hydration, and why is hydration important for everyday people, for athletes, whoever it might be, and how much water do we need to drink, and how do you work it out?
Yeah, sure thing. Look, first of all, dehydration. It's probably one of the most common causes of fatigue and of feeling ill health. A study came out a few years ago where people that were mildly dehydrated suffered, a several percent drop in their cognitive function, their concentration levels, their memory recall, etc. Not only that, but their mood, on a testing scale, they had increased anger, increased frustration, increased sense of irritability, etc. So not only does it affect your cognitive performance, it probably affects your emotional performance, we could call it so. It plays a huge part in how you function. Your body's made up of 70% water, or something like that, and so is your skeletal and your muscle tissue is made up of, something like 50 to 70% water. So, a drop of 2 to 5% in hydration levels within your muscle tissue is also going to have a huge effect on your ability to recruit and properly use your muscle tissue for exercise performance. So it's a very simple thing, slight dehydration. It's going to have mental impairment. It's going to cause emotional impairment. It's going to cause physical activity impairment as well. So it's a really common thing. I mean, who drinks a couple of litres of water a day? Things like we often mistake, for myself especially. Look, I had a large coffee, so I'm sure that contributed to my intake. And although it does to a degree, caffeine itself is diuretic, and so is tea. You constantly have to weigh that up. As for your question, what's the ideal hydration levels? Look, there isn't, a specific, recommendation. They say 8 glasses of water, but, some glasses of water are this big and others are this big. So who really knows? What you want to be doing is just treating it like a waterfall. So we're not looking for a massive flash flood here. We're just looking at a constant, steady supply of hydration. Essentially, if you're thirsty, you drink, but we don't want to let that thirst build up too much. The thoughts back in the day were that if you're thirsty, you're already dehydrated, and there might be some credibility to that. But it's just making sure that, every hour you're at least having a couple of mouthfuls or several mouthfuls of water.
Yeah. Now, as far as something that, a relevant topic of obviously what we do and all the rest of it. Now, hydration and fat loss, like if you're dehydrated, will that affect fat loss?
Yeah, look, it certainly will from a stress response point of view. Fat loss, one of the biggest factors that affects fat loss is your stress response. So anything that's going to exacerbate that stress response is going to hinder weight loss or fat loss. Now, excessive hard training, that's actually going to hinder fat loss. You'll burn excessive calories, etc., but excessive hard training with excessive calorie restriction, you'll shred down, but at some point it's going to cause, a number of issues that will lead to weight gain in the end. So look, dehydration, will irritate the central nervous system. It's going to make you, cognitively impaired to a degree, and it's going to make it more difficult to make better decisions and to concentrate, to focus. And so when it's coming around to mealtime, you get that angry, thirsty, hungry point of view, and you just kind of jump into the nearest thing that looks or even doesn't look edible, but you just smash it down because, it's hard to, maintain willpower when you're just feeling, so rubbish. So anything that affects your stress response is going to affect your weight loss potential, goals, desires, etc. So, to help with your weight loss, you want to minimize stress across, not only cognitive states, emotional states, physical states, but, all around physiological stress. And that's where hydration would play a big influence on your ability to lose weight.
Now, just quickly, someone said this to me earlier on today about, starvation mode, right? And what that means. Now, I promptly sort of told her that humans have been doing that for quite a prolonged period of time, and it doesn't really have a massively detrimental effect. Like if you go, God forbid, 16 hours without eating any food. Now, when you said a massive restriction of calories, now in your experience, what would you say is a massive restriction of calories, and how long would you have to be in that restricted state generally for your body to start going backwards as far as that stress response elevating because of calorie restriction?
Yeah, sure. And that's where a very nuanced, in-depth and broad approach is very important to consider here. Look, she wasn't entirely wrong that it's going to cause a starvation response. But you weren't wrong either. We have evolved to go through periods of extensive fasting. That's why we have, the ability to fall into ketosis after several hours or, a day or two of not eating. It's a natural fallback mechanism to increase cognitive function whilst resources are low, so that you can maintain high cognitive output, which is one of the hallmarks of human, development, so we can still perform whilst with limited resources. Now, the starvation mode that she's propagating there is tied to very much carbohydrate metabolism. So here's the thing. If I'm constantly increasing or intaking carbohydrates and my blood sugars are going up and then they drop down and I'm eating the carbs to sort of keep that cycle going, say I spike my blood sugars with a big meal, a big, healthy meal of getting my carbs in for muscle growth, and then I go through an extended period where I don't then refuel through that, my body is going to sort of, crave those carbohydrates until it reaches a point of transitioning to beta oxidation, the use of fat as fuel. But whilst it's still operating in a glucose operating machinery, as physiology, its primary energy source being glucose, the longer it goes without, the more it's going to cause panic states. So you've seen people who get hungry and they are off like a firecracker. It's, hey, give me food, shut up, get out of my way. They feel sick, they feel faintish, they feel dizzy. And that is kind of their body going, hey, I need carbs here because that's the only thing I know. If we can push those people into more of a higher fat intake, reducing their carbohydrate intake, then you're going to find that ability to go longer without food is not going to cause that excessive stress response. Now, when you're going through those periods of fasting as a glucose carbohydrate dependent person, when you then come back to eat it, your body's going, hey, you know what? It's been an extended while since I've had this, so I better store more energy. Because that's essentially what your body wants to do. It's been designed to do that. So that's kind of the response that she's talking about. It's a stress response to a reduction of your glucose dependency. And, that's where people, they put this idea forward of like, hey, carbs are as addictive as cocaine and heroin and, all those sorts of drugs. Now, I'm quite hesitant to say that because, I've seen, I've watched documentaries and people who suffer from drug addictions and suffer, they've had terrible circumstances that put them into that position and they go do these unspeakable, unthinkable things for them normally to satisfy that addiction to drugs. Now, I haven't seen anybody robbing a bank, without sounding crass, like prostituting themselves out for a Snickers bar at 1 a.m. on a Saturday night. Okay, and that's a very serious thing, because that's what happens with very drug addicts. So I tend not to compare that. But it is somewhat similar in that it stimulates carbohydrates, the dopamine serotonin receptors in the brain. So if you don't get that constant stimulation and you're used to that constant stimulation, then it causes a panic, and it's like, hey, people get upset and crazy, and they make stupid decisions around food. And I don't mean stupid decisions with disrespect, but they make crazy decisions. Oh my God, I'm going to eat these 9 brownies and can of Coke, and then they feel good. And then as a result of having prolonged lack of food before that, it kind of will naturally, as a byproduct of insulin being somewhat of a fat storage mechanism, it'll store it all, and then that causes that yo-yo cycling of stress response, blood sugars dropping, etc. Does that make sense? Does that sort of answer that question?
Yeah, for sure. It's really that whole mechanism is based around being glucose dependent, right? So if you're fat adapted, you're not going to be able you're not going to get, your body's not going to have that stress response, because it's more adapted to use its own fuel supplies, and that's the evolutionary response that your body has. But because most people are pummeling carbs left, right, and center, that in itself is the starvation
mechanism which drives that stress response.
And the mechanism is based around the fact that you're glucose dependent and not in a more sort of fat adapted state. So that's cool. So it's true, it does work, it does happen like that, but the cause of it is to do with being glucose dependent, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so the people come to me and sort of say, should everybody do a fast? And I'll often say yes and no. If you're coming from a massively high carbohydrate intake, it can be a good thing, because it can just shift you over straight away. But I've also seen it be very rough on people who have gone from, these elite athletes or just people, weekend warriors, gone for a 60% carbohydrate intake and then cutting that out and doing a fast. 12 hours in, these people, it's scary to see the effects it's having on their body. So, I would normally go to them, hey, you know what? Can we just have a week of just kind of nurturing your body, and just looking after it, just slowly reducing those carbs, increasing your fat intake, will get you to a spot where you're starting to feel okay a bit longer. And then it's like, hey, we know at that point we've reduced your glucose dependence, we've increased your beta oxidation rates, which is the use of fat as fuel via the breakdown of fat into ketones. And it's like, hey, we're at that sweet spot now where we're starting to produce a little bit more ketones because we've reduced those carbohydrates. Let's really increase that mechanism further, and let's go into a fast and get that fat production really happening. Now, you can go cold turkey, you can just jump in there as a carb person, but it's going to be a rough 60 hours. It's going to cause a lot of stress, and I don't like stress. People are stressed enough. They've got phones, they've got Facebook, they've got work, they've got lives that never stop, they've got poor sleep, dehydration, which we were talking about originally, etc., etc. So we don't want to be, I just try to minimize stress input as much as possible.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We're getting off topic here. We're going down a rabbit hole.
But essentially we're not, because it's all interrelated. And that's why I get, somewhat wary of rabbit holes. I get, the people who kind of know 99% of the one thing. And they've gone down this rabbit hole. It's kind of like, hey, but if you come back up here a little bit, you still know almost as much as that, but it means you can explore more things. And you'll very quickly realize that if you're not stuck down in that one fundamentalist position, it opens up so many more doors, and it gives you better skills to incorporate 1,000 different things, because they're all interrelated. Your dehydration is exactly related to that carbohydrate mechanism, which is related to stress, which is related to your training performance, which is related to sleep, etc.
Yeah, it's cool. It's about having a broad outlook, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, cool. All right, mate. Well, you crack on, get your swim done, and
that's right.
Do whatever it is that you got to do. Some honey badgers or something similar.
That's right. A bit later on, and hydrate everyone. Yeah, make sure you hydrate.
Drink your water.
That's right. See you soon.
Peace, brother. Thanks, mate.
Peace. Bye.
Yeah.